Detective Lisa Chen had seen it all in her 12 years working internal affairs for the Chicago Police Department. False accusations, planted evidence, cops gone rogue, and careers destroyed by single moments of poor judgment. But nothing in her extensive experience investigating police misconduct had prepared her for what she witnessed on that gray Thursday morning in November. She was reviewing case files in her downtown office when her phone buzzed with an urgent message from the courthouse. Officer Daniel Rodriguez, a decorated canine handler with 8 years of exemplary service, was about to be sentenced for evidence tampering and bribery. The case had been airtight. Rodriguez had been caught on surveillance accepting what appeared to be an envelope of cash from a known drug dealer, and a subsequent search of his patrol car had revealed 2 bags of cocaine that weren't logged in the evidence system. But as Detective Chen watched the courtroom feed on her laptop, she noticed something that would change everything. Rodriguez's canine partner, a German shepherd named Justice, was behaving in a way that made her pause the video and rewind. The dog's body language was unlike anything she'd seen in hundreds of hours of canine training footage. Justice wasn't just agitated, he was actively alerting to something in the courtroom itself. What Detective Chen witnessed next would expose the biggest corruption scandal in the department's history and prove that sometimes the most unlikely witness can be the one who saves the day. Officer Daniel Eduardo Rodriguez had always believed that justice would prevail. Growing up in Pilsen, Chicago's vibrant Mexican-American neighborhood, he had seen firsthand how law enforcement could either uplift or destroy communities. His grandmother, Elena Rodriguez, had raised him with a simple philosophy. Mijo, your actions speak louder than your words, and your character is tested when nobody is watching. At 29, Daniel had achieved everything he dreamed of as a kid watching cop shows with his grandmother. He had graduated from the police academy with honors, earned his detective shield in record time, and been selected for the prestigious K-9 unit after demonstrating an intuitive understanding of canine behavior that impressed even veteran handlers. His partner, Justice, was a 3-year-old German shepherd who had been specifically bred for police work. The dog's lineage traced back to legendary police canines who had served with distinction across multiple departments. But beyond his impressive pedigree, Justice possessed an almost supernatural ability to detect narcotics and explosives that had made him and Daniel one of the most successful canine teams in the city. In their 4 years together, Daniel and Justice had seized over 500 pounds of illegal drugs, arrested 127 suspects, and participated in 89 successful search warrants. Their partnership had saved countless lives by removing dangerous substances from Chicago's streets and helping to dismantle several major drug distribution networks. But more than professional success, Daniel and Justice had developed a bond that transcended the typical handler-dog relationship. They lived together, trained together, and had developed a communication system so sophisticated that Daniel could read Justice's alerts from across a crowded room. The dog had become part of Daniel's family, sleeping at the foot of his bed and joining him for weekend barbecues, where Justice would patiently endure the attention of Daniel's 3 young nieces. Daniel's apartment was filled with photos documenting their partnership, Justice's graduation from K-9 Academy, their first successful drug bust, Justice receiving a commendation for detecting a bomb at a high school graduation ceremony, and dozens of candid shots showing the easy affection between them. The accusations that had destroyed Daniel's career and were about to send him to prison had come out of nowhere, like a lightning strike on a clear day. 3 months earlier, he had been conducting a routine traffic stop when internal affairs investigators claimed surveillance footage showed him accepting money from the driver. A subsequent search of his patrol car had revealed cocaine that Daniel swore he had never seen before. Despite his protests, despite his clean record, despite character witnesses who vouched for his integrity, the evidence against him seemed overwhelming. Security camera footage appeared to show him accepting an envelope from Miguel Santos, a man with multiple drug convictions. The cocaine found in his car tested positive for Santos's fingerprints, creating a narrative that Daniel was being paid to look the other way on drug trafficking. Daniel knew he was innocent, but he couldn't prove it. The evidence was too perfect, too convenient, and too damning. His lawyer had advised him to take a plea deal, but Daniel had refused. He would rather go to prison for something he didn't do than admit to corruption that went against everything he believed in. Now, sitting in the defendant's chair in Judge Margaret O'Brien's courtroom, Daniel faced the possibility of losing everything. His career, his freedom, his reputation, and most painfully, his partnership with Justice. The prosecution's case against Officer Daniel Rodriguez had been devastating in its apparent thoroughness. Assistant District Attorney Marcus Thompson had painted a picture of a decorated cop who had fallen victim to the same temptations that had corrupted officers throughout history. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Thompson had argued during closing statements 3 weeks earlier, we have clear surveillance footage showing Officer Rodriguez accepting what appears to be payment from a known drug dealer. We have physical evidence, cocaine, found in his patrol car with the defendant's fingerprints on the packaging. We have phone records showing multiple calls between Rodriguez and Miguel Santos over a 6-month period. The evidence is not just overwhelming, it is indisputable. The surveillance footage had been particularly damaging. The video, captured by a traffic camera at the intersection of 18th Street and Blue Island Avenue, showed Daniel's patrol car pulling over Santos's vehicle. The timestamp indicated a routine traffic stop that lasted approximately 8 minutes. But at the 4:23 mark in the footage, Santos could be seen handing Daniel what appeared to be an envelope, which Daniel placed inside his jacket. Miguel Santos, testifying under a plea agreement that reduced his own charges, had claimed he had been paying Rodriguez $500 per month for protection. Officer Rodriguez told me he would tip me off about drug raids in my territory, Santos testified. I paid him because I was scared of going to prison and leaving my kids without a father. The cocaine discovered in Daniel's patrol car had been found during a random inspection conducted by Internal Affairs as part of their investigation. 2 plastic bags containing a total of 4 ounces of high-purity cocaine were discovered hidden under the driver's seat, precisely where Santos claimed he had been instructed to place drug samples for Rodriguez to analyze and report as field-tested negative. Phone records presented by the prosecution showed 17 calls between Daniel's personal cell phone and Santos's number over 6 months, including 3 calls on the day before Daniel's arrest. Thompson argued these calls represented coordination of their illegal arrangement. Character witnesses for Daniel had been impressive, but ultimately ineffective against the weight of physical evidence. Captain Maria Gonzalez, Daniel's commanding officer, testified that he was one of the most dedicated and honest officers I've supervised in 23 years. Father Miguel Herrera from St. Adalbert Catholic Church spoke about Daniel's volunteer work with at-risk youth in Pilsen. His K-9 training instructor, Sergeant Robert Kim, called him a natural handler with an intuitive understanding of K-9 behavior that I've rarely seen, but the defense's character witnesses couldn't overcome. The prosecution's physical evidence. Daniel's lawyer, public defender Jennifer Walsh, had fought valiantly, but struggled to create reasonable doubt in the face of surveillance video, physical evidence, and cooperating witness testimony. The most painful aspect of the trial for Daniel had been watching justices' confusion during the proceedings. K-9s were rarely allowed in courtrooms, but Judge O'Brien had made an exception for the sentencing hearing, recognizing that justice's future would be determined by the court's decision. The dog sat quietly beside Daniel's chair, but his behavior was noticeably agitated. Justice kept looking around the courtroom, his nose working constantly, his ears rotating to track sounds that seemed to make him increasingly uncomfortable. Dr. Amanda Foster, the department's K-9 behavioral specialist, had testified that Justice would need to be reassigned to a new handler or retired from service. The bond between a K-9 and his handler is so strong that separation can cause significant behavioral issues, Dr. Foster explained. Justice has been trained to work exclusively with Officer Rodriguez. Without that partnership, his effectiveness as a working dog would be severely compromised. The testimony about Justice's future had been more devastating to Daniel than the prospect of his own incarceration. He could handle prison time if he had to, but the thought of Justice being confused and abandoned by the only partner he'd ever known was unbearable. Daniel's grandmother, Elena, attended every day of the trial, sitting in the first row behind the defense table. At 84, she had trouble walking, but refused to miss a single session. Mijo is innocent, she would tell anyone who would listen outside the courthouse. I raised that boy, and I know his heart. He would never betray his oath or his dog. But as the evidence mounted against him, Daniel began to wonder if even his grandmother's faith in him was misplaced. The surveillance footage was clear. The physical evidence was undeniable, and Santos's testimony was detailed and consistent. Either Daniel was guilty of crimes he couldn't remember committing, or someone had orchestrated an incredibly sophisticated frame job. The jury had deliberated for only 4 hours before returning a guilty verdict on all charges. Accepting bribes, evidence tampering, and conspiracy to distribute narcotics. Judge O'Brien had scheduled sentencing for the following Thursday, giving Daniel 1 week to prepare for what would likely be a minimum of 5 years in federal prison. Thursday morning arrived gray and cold, with November wind cutting through downtown Chicago like a knife. Judge Margaret O'Brien had been on the bench for 16 years and had presided over hundreds of police corruption cases. She prided herself on being firm but fair, understanding that police officers faced unique temptations and pressures, but also recognizing that corruption in law enforcement undermined public trust in ways that rippled through entire communities. Daniel arrived at the courthouse with his lawyer, Jennifer Walsh, at 8:30 a.m., 30 minutes before the scheduled hearing. His grandmother, Elena, was already waiting outside the courtroom, supported by Daniel's 2 sisters and his brother-in-law. The family had been devastated by the verdict, but they maintained their support for Daniel even as they struggled to understand how the evidence against him could be so compelling if he was truly innocent. Justice had been brought to the courthouse by Officer Patricia Martinez, who had been caring for the dog since Daniel's arrest. The plan was for Justice to be present during the sentencing so that Judge O'Brien could make decisions about the dog's future. Justice would either be reassigned to Officer Martinez permanently, transferred to another handler, or retired from service and placed with a civilian family. When Daniel saw Justice in the courthouse hallway, the reunion was emotionally devastating. The dog immediately strained against his leash, whimpering and jumping to reach his handler. Daniel dropped to his knees and embraced Justice, both of them trembling with the intensity of their connection. "I'm sorry, boy," Daniel whispered into Justice's fur. "I'm so sorry this is happening to us." Justice's behavior during the reunion concerned Dr. Amanda Foster, who was observing the interaction to assess the dog's psychological state. Instead of the typical excited reunion behavior she expected, Justice seemed agitated and distressed. The dog kept looking around the courthouse hallway, his nose working frantically, his body tense with what appeared to be anxiety rather than joy. "He's not responding normally," Dr. Foster noted to Officer Martinez. Usually, when a K9 is reunited with his handler after separation, we see explosive joy followed by calm contentment. Justice seems stressed about something beyond the separation. The courtroom was packed with Daniel's supporters, fellow police, officers, community members from Pilsen, and media representatives covering what had become a high-profile case. Daniel's story had resonated with the Latino community, many of whom viewed him as a symbol of successful integration into law enforcement, who was being unfairly targeted by a corrupt system. Judge O'Brien called the court to order at 9 a.m. sharp. "We are here for sentencing in the matter of the people of Illinois versus Daniel Eduardo Rodriguez. Before I pronounce sentence, I will hear from the prosecution, the defense, and the defendant if he chooses to make a statement." Assistant District Attorney Thompson rose to address the court. "Your Honor, the defendant's crimes represent a fundamental betrayal of public trust. Officer Rodriguez took an oath to protect and serve the community, but instead chose to profit from the drug trade that destroys families and neighborhoods. The prosecution recommends a sentence of 7 to 10 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised probation." Jennifer Walsh stood to present Daniel's case for leniency. "Your Honor, while we respect the jury's verdict, I ask you to consider Officer Rodriguez's exemplary service record, his contributions to the community, and the testimony of character witnesses who have known him for years. This appears to be an isolated incident completely out of character for a man who has dedicated his career to fighting the very crimes he's been convicted of committing." Judge O'Brien then addressed Daniel directly. "Mr. Rodriguez, do you wish to make a statement before I pronounce sentence?" Daniel rose slowly, his hands trembling as he gripped the edge of the defense table. He looked around the courtroom, seeing his grandmother's tear-filled eyes, his sister's supportive nods, and the faces of community members who had believed in his innocence even when the evidence seemed overwhelming. "Your Honor," Daniel began, his voice steady despite his emotional turmoil, "I want to state clearly, and for the record, that I am innocent of these charges. I have never taken money from Miguel Santos or anyone else. I have never tampered with evidence or participated in drug trafficking. I don't know how the evidence against me was created, but I know it doesn't represent the truth of who I am or what I've done." He paused, looking down at Justice, who was sitting beside Officer Martinez but straining to maintain eye contact with Daniel. "But more than my own fate, Your Honor, I'm concerned about my partner Justice. He doesn't understand why we've been separated, and he doesn't deserve to be punished for crimes I didn't commit. I'm asking you to please ensure that he's placed with a handler who will appreciate his abilities and give him the partnership he deserves." Daniel's voice broke slightly as he continued. "Justice has been the best partner I could have asked for. He saved lives, protected officers, and served this community with distinction. Whatever happens to me, please don't let my conviction destroy his career too." Judge O'Brien nodded gravely. "Mr. Rodriguez, while I appreciate your concern for your canine partner, I must focus on the crimes for which you have been convicted. The evidence against you was compelling, and the jury's verdict was unanimous. However, I also recognize your years of service and the character testimony presented on your behalf." She was about to announce Daniel's sentence when Justice suddenly stood up and began barking. The dog's behavior was so unexpected and intense that it startled everyone in the courtroom. Justice wasn't displaying the typical alert behavior Daniel was familiar with. This was something different, more urgent, almost frantic. "Order in the courtroom," Judge O'Brien called, but Justice's barking only intensified. The dog was straining. Against Officer Martinez's hold, his entire body focused on something in the courtroom that no one else could identify. Dr. Foster, who was sitting in the gallery observing Justice's behavior, stood up. "Your Honor, may I approach? Justice is displaying behavior that suggests he's detecting something specific. This isn't emotional distress. This is an active alert." Judge O'Brien looked confused but intrigued. "Dr. Foster, are you suggesting that Justice is alerting to narcotics in my courtroom?" "Your Honor, that's exactly what I'm suggesting," Dr. Foster replied. "Justice is a highly trained detection dog, and his behavior is consistent with detecting illegal substances. He's not just barking, he's giving a specific alert that he's been trained to give when he detects narcotics." The courtroom erupted in murmurs as the implications of Dr. Foster's statement sank in. If Justice was alerting to drugs in the courtroom during Daniel's sentencing hearing, it raised serious questions about who might have those drugs and why they were present. Daniel looked at Justice with recognition dawning in his eyes. This was the same alert behavior Justice had displayed during their most successful drug busts. The dog had detected something that everyone else in the courtroom had missed. Judge O'Brien banged her gavel for silence. "Dr. Foster, are you absolutely certain that Justice is giving a narcotics alert?" "Your Honor, I've observed this dog's behavior for over 3 years. He's alerting to something specific, and based on his training and track record, that something is almost certainly illegal drugs." The judge looked around the courtroom with new eyes, realizing that Justice's presence might have inadvertently exposed something far more significant than anyone had anticipated. The courtroom fell into an electric silence as Justice's barking intensified. Dr. Amanda Foster moved closer to observe the dog's behavior, her trained eye cataloging every detail of Justice's alert. Officer Patricia Martinez, who had been holding Justice's leash, looked bewildered by the dog's sudden change in demeanor. "Your Honor," Dr. Foster addressed Judge O'Brien with growing certainty, "Justice is displaying classic indication behavior. His alert is directional and sustained, which means he's not just detecting trace amounts of narcotics, he's detecting a significant quantity in active proximity." Judge O'Brien studied the German Shepherd, whose body was now rigid with focus. His nose pointed toward the prosecution table. The implications were staggering. If Justice was alerting to drugs in the courtroom during Daniel's sentencing for drug-related corruption, it suggested possibilities that no one had considered. Detective Lisa Chen, who had been observing the proceedings from the back of the courtroom as part of her ongoing investigation, felt her pulse quicken. She had been reviewing Daniel's case files for weeks, looking for inconsistencies that might explain her lingering doubts about his guilt. Justice's behavior was providing a real-time indication that something was fundamentally wrong with the prosecution's narrative. Assistant District Attorney Marcus Thompson looked visibly uncomfortable as Justice's alert continued. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. The dog is probably just responding to stress or unfamiliar surroundings. We can't allow a canine's behavior to disrupt official court proceedings." But Daniel recognized something in Justice's behavior that others were missing. This wasn't stress or confusion. This was the same focused, determined alert that Justice had given during their most important drug busts. The dog had detected something specific, and his training was compelling him to communicate that detection. To his handler, "Justice, show me," Daniel said quietly. using a command phrase that had been part of their working relationship for 4 years. Justice immediately strained toward the prosecution table, his body language becoming even more intense. The dog was trying to lead Daniel to the source of whatever he was detecting, but the courtroom setting and Officer Martinez's restraint were preventing him from completing his trained sequence. Dr. Foster moved closer to Justice, studying his posture and breathing. Your Honor, this dog is giving the strongest narcotics alert I've seen in 3 years of observing him. His behavior indicates he's detecting a substantial quantity of illegal drugs within approximately 10 feet of his current position. Judge O'Brien looked around the courtroom, her judicial experience warring with the extraordinary circumstances unfolding before her. Dr. Foster, you're suggesting that someone in this courtroom is currently in possession of illegal narcotics? Your Honor, that's exactly what Justice is indicating, Dr. Foster replied. His alert behavior is unmistakable and consistent with his training and track record. Detective Chen stepped forward from the back of the courtroom. Your Honor, may I identify myself? I'm Detective Lisa Chen with Internal Affairs. I've been reviewing Officer Rodriguez's case, and I request permission to follow Justice's alert. To its logical conclusion, the courtroom erupted in confused murmurs. Daniel's family looked bewildered, media representatives were frantically taking notes, and court personnel were unsure how to respond to the unprecedented situation. Judge O'Brien considered her options. She had presided over thousands of cases, but never had a police dog interrupted sentencing proceedings with what appeared to be an active narcotics alert. The situation was legally complex and potentially explosive, but her judicial instincts told her that Justice's behavior might be revealing something significant. Detective Chen, while this is highly irregular, I'm going to allow you to investigate Justice's alert. Officer Martinez, please allow the dog to follow his detection training while maintaining courtroom security. Justice immediately strained toward the prosecution table, his body trembling with the intensity of his alert. As Officer Martinez allowed him to move closer, Justice's behavior became even more focused. The dog's nose was working frantically, and his body language indicated he was homing in on the source of whatever he was detecting. Assistant District Attorney Thompson stood up abruptly. Your Honor, this is a circus. We can't allow a dog's behavior to undermine the integrity of these proceedings. Officer Rodriguez has been convicted by a jury, and his sentencing should proceed as scheduled. But Justice's alert had become impossible to ignore. The dog was now sitting directly in front of the prosecution table, his intense stare fixed on Thompson's briefcase. His tail was motionless, his body rigid, and his breathing controlled. Classic indication behavior that any experienced canine handler would recognize as a positive alert. Detective Chen approached the prosecution table with growing excitement. Her investigation had identified several inconsistencies in Daniel's case, but she had lacked the evidence to challenge the conviction. Justice's behavior was providing real-time indication that something significant was hidden in the courtroom. Mr. Thompson, Justice is alerting specifically to your briefcase, Detective Chen observed. Would you mind opening it for examination? Thompson's face had gone pale. This is ridiculous. My briefcase contains confidential case files and legal documents. I'm not going to subject it to search based on a dog's behavior. Judge O'Brien studied Thompson's demeanor with new interest. In 16 years on the bench, she had developed an instinct for reading people under stress. Thompson's resistance to what should have been a simple request was raising red flags. Mr. Thompson, if your briefcase contains nothing but legal documents, opening it should pose no problem. Justice's alert behavior is remarkably specific and consistent with his training. I'm ordering you to open your briefcase for inspection. Thompson's hands were visibly shaking as he reached for his briefcase. Your Honor, I protest this irregular procedure. This sets a dangerous precedent for allowing animals to disrupt court proceedings. Mr. Thompson, open the briefcase. Judge, O'Brien repeated, her tone leaving no room for argument. As Thompson opened his briefcase, Justice's alert behavior reached peak intensity. The dog was practically vibrating with excitement, his training compelling him to indicate the precise location of whatever he was detecting. Detective Chen peered into the open briefcase and felt her heart stop. Nestled beneath legal documents and case files were 2 plastic bags containing what appeared to be cocaine, bags that looked remarkably similar to the evidence that had been found in Daniel's patrol car. The courtroom exploded in gasps and confused shouts as Detective Chen carefully removed the bags from Thompson's briefcase. But what she discovered next was even more shocking. The bags were labeled with evidence tags from Daniel's case, but they were filled with what appeared to be fresh cocaine rather than the processed evidence that should have been destroyed months earlier. "Your Honor," Detective Chen announced, her voice carrying clearly over the courtroom chaos. "Justice has led us to what appears to be evidence tampering on a massive scale. These bags match the description of evidence presented against Officer Rodriguez, but they shouldn't exist. The original evidence in this case was supposedly destroyed after the trial concluded." Daniel stared at the bags in Detective Chen's hands, his mind racing to understand the implications. If Thompson had been carrying evidence from Daniel's case, it suggested that the entire prosecution had been compromised from the beginning. Justice, having completed his alert successfully, sat calmly beside Daniel's chair, his tail wagging slightly. The dog had done exactly what he'd been trained to do: detect illegal drugs and indicate their location to law enforcement. But in doing so, he had potentially exposed a corruption scheme far more extensive than anyone had imagined. Judge O'Brien called for order in the courtroom, but her own mind was reeling with the implications of what Justice had uncovered. If the prosecutor in Daniel's case had been carrying drugs in his briefcase during the sentencing hearing, it raised fundamental questions about the integrity of the entire investigation and trial. Assistant District Attorney Thompson was now slumped in his chair, his face ashen and his hands trembling. The confident prosecutor who had painted Daniel as a corrupt cop was now facing the possibility that he himself was the corrupt party in this scenario. "Mr. Thompson," Judge O'Brien said quietly, "you are advised of your right to remain silent and to have an attorney present during any questioning. Detective Chen, please secure the evidence and contact the appropriate authorities. This sentencing hearing is hereby postponed, pending a full investigation into these new developments." Daniel looked down at Justice, who was sitting calmly beside him, apparently satisfied that he had completed his job successfully. The dog's training had compelled him to alert to the drugs in Thompson's briefcase, but Justice had no way of knowing that his simple detection work had potentially saved his handler from years in prison for crimes he didn't commit. "Good boy." "Justice," Daniel whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You did your job perfectly." The press conference announcing Daniel Rodriguez's complete exoneration was held on the steps of the Chicago Police Department headquarters on a bright December morning, 6 weeks after Justice's courtroom alert had exposed the corruption scandal. Superintendent David Martinez stood behind a podium flanked by FBI agent Sarah Kim, Detective Lisa Chen, and Daniel himself, with Justice sitting calmly at his handler's side. "Today, we are here to acknowledge a grave injustice that was perpetrated against one of our finest officers," Superintendent Martinez began, his voice carrying clearly across the crowd of reporters, community members, and fellow police officers who had gathered for the announcement. Officer Daniel Rodriguez was not just wrongfully convicted. He was the victim of an elaborate conspiracy designed to destroy his career and reputation. The investigation's findings had been devastating for the department's reputation, but vindicating for Daniel and the other officers who had been framed. Federal prosecutors had filed charges against 17 individuals, including Marcus Thompson, Miguel Santos, Detective Raymond Burke, and 14 other participants in what FBI agent Kim described as the most extensive corruption scheme in Chicago law enforcement history. Thompson had been arrested at his Lincoln Park condominium, where federal agents discovered additional evidence including $400,000 in cash, detailed records of the corruption network, and communications with criminals across multiple states. His arrest had been particularly satisfying for Daniel, who watched the news coverage with Justice beside him on his living room couch. Watching Thompson in handcuffs was surreal, Daniel later told reporters. "For months, I questioned my own memory and wondered if I was losing my mind. Seeing him arrested validated everything I knew to be true about my innocence." The evidence against Thompson was overwhelming. In addition to the materials found in his briefcase and home, federal investigators had recovered deleted emails, traced financial transactions, and documented a pattern of case manipulation stretching back over 4 years. Thompson's gambling debts had made him vulnerable to Santos's recruitment, and his prosecutorial authority had made him invaluable to the drug trafficking operation. Judge Margaret O'Brien, who had presided over Daniel's original trial and witnessed Justice's alert firsthand, issued a rare public statement acknowledging the judicial system's failure in Daniel's case. "The corruption revealed in this investigation represents a fundamental betrayal of public trust," Judge O'Brien said. Officer Rodriguez and his K-9 partner Justice have not only cleared their own names, but have helped expose a cancer that was corrupting our entire justice system. The exoneration process had been swift once the FBI investigation confirmed Daniel's innocence. All charges against him were formally dismissed. His conviction was expunged from his record, and he was reinstated to full duty with the Chicago Police Department. The department also issued a formal apology and announced that Daniel would receive full back pay for the 6 months he had been.